First, this is unbelievable, it's embarrassing, it's proof of the total idiocy of our political class, helped, I may say, by a lot of deluded journalists. This afternoon, a warning from our electricity watchdog. Our electricity crisis has spread. Shortages now in 5 states with possible blackouts or interruptions, not just in Queensland again, but New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. And that, plus 2 other bits of bad news today, makes this the day when our new Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has to work out how many of his election promises he must now dump, and quickly. Because today's told him this is not a good time for a Prime Minister who was a hard left-wing radical as a student, that's him on the left as at a protest, and joined the big spending Labor left for decades, saying what he loved best was fighting Conservatives.
I like fighting Tories. That's what I do. That's what I do.
But now it's time Albanese actually became a Conservative himself, because he's actually got 3 shocking reminders today that the fantasy politics of the left, they don't work. You know, the policies of the left where it's more important to seem good than to actually do it, where you pretend that consequences don't matter because, you know, your heart is pure. That kind of fantasy politics. Well, the 3 terrible lessons today telling Albanese to wise up here. First, the stock market today dropped more than 4% in one day. That's nearly $90 billion of value wiped out one day. And the lesson here is, if you keep spending much more than you earn, it's going to catch up with you. Inflation takes off, interest rates get jacked up, and the stock market takes huge fright. And what Albanese's got to learn is that he can't keep promising, for instance, that wages have got to rise as fast as inflation, because that way they'll just keep cascading off each other. And everything you see already is going to get a lot worse. We could even face recession. And Albanese also must drop that insane promise he made to spend even more than the Liberals, $8 billion more. Now is the time to cut, not splurge. Second bit of bad news today, another boat of illegal immigrants has arrived, 3rd boat to be intercepted since the Albanese government was elected. Now, so far, the government is sending these illegal immigrants straight back home.
We're having take-backs where appropriate, and we have said that Operation Sovereign Borders remains in place.
But with every boat on the water that Labor is luring over again, the chance of people drowning gets higher, and the chance that our Navy gets overwhelmed is also higher, especially with 14,000 registered so-called refugees stuck in Indonesia waiting to come. And even more particularly with many Sri Lankans now facing food shortages and soaring prices, causing angry riots against the government there, with hundreds of people reportedly signing up with people smugglers to come over here too, now that Labor is back in power. I must point out too, this crisis in Sri Lanka was triggered by even more mad leftism. The Sri Lankan government went green and banned chemical fertilisers made with fossil fuels, thus ruining the harvests of tea and rice. But the lesson for Albanese here is to stop telling the world that some lucky illegal immigrants can get very, very lucky indeed here in Australia. They get a visa from Labor, plus donations, free house, lots of cash. You see, one of the Albanese government's very first decision was to very publicly reverse a decision to send back to Sri Lanka 2 illegal immigrants and their 2 daughters, the Murugappan family that have fought right up to the High Court to stay here despite being fake refugees, not persecuted at all. But the new Albanese government gave the family a bridging visa and didn't do this on the quiet either. It boasted, it shouted, it let people back in Sri Lanka know that it was sending this family back to Biloela in Queensland.
I'm very proud we've brought this family home. I am very proud, and the community will be as well.
And the family didn't just get visas, it got $200,000 in crowd-funded donations, plus free rent for a house in Biloela. And I got to ask what Albanese and the refugee activists were thinking, that the world wasn't watching? You imagine how all this news is going down back in Sri Lanka, where a lot of people earn just $13 a day and now struggle to buy food. No wonder they're lining up for the boats. But to that third smack in the face today, as I mentioned, this unbelievable, embarrassing shortage of electricity and gas in a country this rich with both gas, oil, coal, what have you. It's absolutely incredible for a first world country to now have a third world electricity supply. It's a disgrace. Last night, electricity shortages in Queensland. Some companies had to power down. Today, power shortages in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia as well. And Albanese's new climate change minister, Chris Bowen, a real global warming zealot, even had to ask people today to switch off to save the system.
I expect most of the things that would have been turned off already because power bills have been high. So swimming pool filters and swimming pool heaters and outside lighting, which is not necessary at any particular time. That sort of thing. There's a general request for people to be aware that the market is tight, and if that could be turned off, that would be useful.
Now, there are some people saying, well, this crisis is just because of the past Liberal governments, because they didn't do what Labor now will. Unfortunately, Albanese is one of them.
Well, you've had a decade of neglect. You've had a decade for neglect where we have an energy grid that isn't fit for purpose for the 21st century. You've had too many arguments taking place rather than the investment certainty which comes from having an energy policy. And what we find is that the consequences of the former government's failure to put in place an energy policy is being felt right now.
Albanese has totally misread it. Here he is promising even more of what the Liberals did. That is the problem. He wants to do it more and faster, to have even more radical global warming policies that destroy our coal-fired power stations when we already do not have reliable power generators to take their place, when wind and solar don't work, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And that has to be another policy Albanese is going to have to dump, and fast. He's got to drop his crazy promise to slash our emissions even more than the Liberals promised, and to rely on energy, renewable energy like wind and solar instead, for 82% of our electricity. 82% wind, solar and other renewables in just 8 years from now. You think of what that takes. I tell you, the head of Alinta Energy, which runs 9 of our surviving coal-fired generators, says closing even more coal-fired stations is going to be economic suicide. Prices are going to explode. And Anna Collier, our Energy Security Board chief, last week pointed out how hard, or frankly insane, Albanese's target is. She said, we need to build 8 times more as much renewable energy than we have right now. 8 times? And just in the next 10 years, we're going to need $14 billion investment in the transmission network, running, wires to all these new wind farms that are going to sprout all over the place, which means, she said, building 2/3 again of the system we have right now. And she said it's actually mind-boggling when you stop to think about how we're actually going to do all that. Mind-boggling, it's frankly nuts. The world has given Albanese a massive wake-up. The time for big spending is over. The time for boasting how kind you are to boat people, over. And the time for killing off coal-fired power stations, my God, is that really over?